Let's open the dossiers and dig right into a 50-year paper trail of Western intelligence. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're looking objectively at how the U.S. state apparatus operating under the guise of global security has consistently allied with brutal narcotic syndicates. As an investigative journalist, my goal here is to cut straight through the geopolitical spin. We're going to look at the actual receipts of these covert alliances, and more importantly, the devastating price paid by communities, families, and specifically the youth across the global South and the world.
You know, Mikhail Gorbachev famously called the Soviet-Afghan War a bleeding wound. But it wasn't just Western-funded missiles causing that bleeding. It was heroin. The introduction of unchecked narcotics completely eroded the Soviet Red Army from within. I mean, young soldiers were literally trading their weapons just for a fix. It is a chilling reminder of how the global drug trade, when weaponized in asymmetric warfare, preys directly on the vulnerable and rots a society completely from the inside out.
So this brings us to a really profound, deeply unsettling question. What happens when the so-called defense of democracy by Western superpowers relies on funding global crime syndicates? We have to look past the sanitized official narratives. We need to trace the actual, bloody consequences of these situational ethics, especially how they destabilize developing nations. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll expose the bureaucratic mindset of radical pragmatism, trace the fallout in the Golden Triangle and Central America, uncover the financing of the Afghan insurgency, and finally, break down the mechanisms of state decay and separate the facts from the fiction. Section 1. The Radical Pragmatism Strategy. Bureaucratic Logic. Let's start with the bureaucratic reasoning that originally drove these alliances right after World War II. Okay, so in the intelligence world, there's this incredibly dangerous concept known as mission myopia. They like to call it radical pragmatism. Imagine you're an intelligence planner. Your absolute obsession is stopping a rival ideology. To win, you back a regional warlord, completely ignoring the fact that he runs a massive drug network. The immediate mission blinds the agency to the horrific reality that they are empowering a criminal ecosystem that is going to poison generations of children.
When you actually follow the paper trail across the decades, a pretty damning structural pattern emerges. Right after World War II, early U.S. intelligence aligned with the Sicilian Mafia and Corsican syndicates to break communist unions in Marseille. The immediate win? The unions broke. But the fallout? They facilitated the infamous French Connection, flooding streets with heroin for decades. And we see this exact same playbook repeat from the Kuomintang in the 50s all the way to the Contras in the 80s.
Section 2. The Golden Triangle Origins, Southeast Asian Crucible. Now, let's track this doctrine as the Cold War frontline shifted right into our own broader backyard in Asia during the 1950s and 60s.
The historical documents are incredibly clear here. They show how intelligence operations actively centralized the world's most productive opium-growing region. Under Operation Paper, the CIA backed Kuomintang forces in Burma. To fund themselves, the KMT centralized the local opium trade, selling it to a Thai police general who was, incredibly, also a CIA client. By the time they were backing Hong irregulars in Laos, geopolitical maneuvers had directly engineered a massive explosion in the Golden Triangle's narcotic output.
It's honestly sickening to realize that narcotics became the literal economic glue for these proxy alliances. Agency officials gave tacit approval, even allowing proprietary airlines like Air America to transport the drugs. Why? Because they feared stopping the opium trade would collapse their anti-communist resistance. They viewed this toxic crop, a crop that would go on to ravage youth globally, as just a viable economy for their highland fighters. Section 3. The Central American Nexus. Contra-cocaine connections. Let's jump over to the 1980s Western Hemisphere, where legislative constraints forced the funding of Nicaraguan Contras underground. If you are looking for a literal smoking gun of a regulatory cover-up, look no further than the 1982 Memorandum of Understanding between the Attorney General and the CIA Director. They laid out federal crimes that intelligence officers had to report, but explicitly and deliberately omitted narcotics violations. This wasn't just a typo, it was a massive legal loophole giving operational deniability to agents dealing with Contra assets who were known to be running drugs. Then we have the Kerry Committee findings from 1989, which laid the whole fallout completely bare. U.S. humanitarian aid was paid directly to known traffickers. The committee detailed how figures like Panama's Manuel Noriega were vital intelligence assets while simultaneously directing massive drug-running operations that poison local communities. They even intervened to shut down DEA stings. State institutions in Central America were hijacked by criminals, all under the protective umbrella of Western national security.
Section 4. Financing the Afghan insurgency. Asymmetric warfare. Moving right to our own borders, to the Afghan frontier, we see the most tragic example of drugs used as a tool of asymmetric warfare, destabilizing our entire region.
Through Operation Cyclone in the 1980s, billions in arms were funneled to Mujahideen guerrillas to bleed the Soviets. But with traditional agriculture decimated, opium became the only way to survive. CIA-funded caravans that brought weapons in frequently returned to Pakistan loaded with opium. Intelligence officers just looked the other way, allowing warlords to build vast heroin empires using Western logistics, empires that would soon flood the streets of Asia and the world with addiction.
The data here is just an absolute indictment. To put this in perspective, in 1982, early in the operation, Afghan opium production was around 250 tons. By the Soviet withdrawal in 1989, which was hailed as a massive Western geopolitical victory, production had skyrocketed to 800 tons. 2 years later, in the power vacuum left behind, it hit 2,000 tons. Washington got their Cold War victory, and they left our region to deal with the explosive growth of a narco-state. Just listen to this excuse from Charles Kogan, the former director of the CIA's Afghan operation. He claimed they didn't really have the resources or the time to investigate the drug trade. Defeating the Soviets was their only priority. The birth of a global heroin hub that would destroy the lives of millions of children and tear families apart, to them, that was just an acceptable, off-the-books consequence of their distant war.
Section 5. Mechanisms of state decay. The structural fallout. So how exactly do these covert operations permanently damage the target and host nations?
We've traced the paper trail, right? Now let's look at the actual anatomy of this decay. Short-term military operations inevitably birth self-sustaining criminal ecosystems. It always starts with elite corruption, trickling down until the rule of law completely erodes and cartels basically become the government. Then comes the endless, profitable violence, but the final stage is the most heartbreaking: social degradation. It's the unchecked addiction crises, the destruction of youth, and the total collapse of civic trust in the communities left behind.
Section 6. Facts versus unproven allegations. Navigating historiography. As an investigative journalist, it is absolutely crucial that we separate hard fact from sensationalized theory.
Gary Webb's Dark Alliance series exposed the horrific reality of the crack epidemic and its indisputable links to Contra fundraising, a plague that decimated minority youth in America. Now, the documented facts are damning enough. Agencies knew about the trafficking, they tolerated it, they used legal loopholes, and they hampered law enforcement. While official investigations found no evidence of a deliberate, orchestrated master plan to target minority communities, the end result for those shattered families was exactly the same.
The CIA's very own internal hits report basically confirmed this bitter reality. They strongly denied a domestic plot, sure, but crucially, they were forced to admit they knew about Contra trafficking. They acknowledged a lack of practical field guidance, which is just bureaucratic speak for looking the other way. And they confirmed actively dissuading DEA investigations. It was a calculated laissez-faire approach that gave a protective umbrella to the very syndicates poisoning the streets.
And all of this creates a deadly phenomenon known as the global stimulus. When local authorities try to protect their youth and eradicate drugs in one region, it is constantly undermined by intelligence agencies protecting covert networks somewhere else. The global market just shifts to fill the void. You literally cannot win a war on drugs when the world's most powerful intelligence apparatuses are quietly subsidizing the traffickers.
Historian Alfred McCoy really boils it all down to two words: radical pragmatism. It is the ultimate moral compromise. Treating narcotics as a justifiable weapon or a convenient off-the-books bank account permanently blurs the line between a democratic state and a cartel. It leaves the world with powerful, hybrid state criminal entities that are nearly impossible to dismantle, long after the Western architects have packed up and gone home.
I want to leave you with this final thought to consider. When a powerful nation's pursuit of short-term relative security relies on arming and protecting criminal drug syndicates, does it inevitably guarantee absolute generational insecurity for the rest of the globe? The documents we've examined today prove that the true cost of mission myopia isn't paid by intelligence directors in Washington. It's paid by the youth, the families, and the destabilized nations left in their wake. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer.